co-sponsored with my colleague and friend, Mr. Davis, to designate the new Interstate 70 bridge over the Mississippi River connecting the city of St. Louis and southwestern Illinois as the Stan Musial Veterans Memorial Bridge. As the U.S. representative who has the honor of representing the St. Louis Cardinals, it is a special privilege for me to speak about Stan Musial from the perspective of a member of Congress, and also from the memory of a young boy at Old Sportsman's Park with my dad, former Congressman Bill Clay, as we watched Stan play near the end of his remarkable career. Stan Musial was simply one of the greatest baseball players of all time. And as was noted earlier, he was elected to baseball's Hall of Fame on the first ballot. And that much is known to the world. But, Mr. Speaker, what is less known is that as a good player, as he was on the field, Stan Musial was even a better man off of the field. In his own quiet way, Stan Musial was also on the vanguard of fighting discrimination and changing America. Stan was born in the small town of Donora, Pennsylvania, the fifth of 5 children. Donora is also the hometown of baseball's famous Griffey family. As a young man, Stan was no stranger to the challenges of African Americans and the evils of segregation. Years before the desegregation of baseball in 1947, Stan, a gifted athlete, was playing basketball with Buddy Griffey, the father of the great Ken Griffey Sr. and the grandfather of the great Ken Griffey Jr. When their high school team was supposed to have dinner in a segregated hotel, Stan and the rest of the team walked out. In 1947, 6 years after Stan was called up to the Cardinals, Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier with the Brooklyn Dodgers. And many more great black and Latino players would follow, but they faced racial taunts and threats on an almost daily basis, sometimes from the fans in the stands, sometimes from the opposing team, and sadly, sometimes from their own teammates. And when some white players on the St. Louis Cardinals threatened to boycott the game if they were forced to play with blacks, Musial stood tall for justice and stopped the boycott before it started. When Stan died, stories from those difficult days were told with great reverence and respect. Upon hearing of his death, Hall of Famer Willie Mays recalled a story from an All-Star game in the 1950s. Before the game, in one corner of the National League clubhouse, sat Mays, Hank Aaron, Ernie Banks, and Frank Robinson, playing cards all by themselves. The white ball players on the National League roster either ignored them or were openly hostile. So Stan Musial, who by then was one of the biggest stars in the game, simply walked over, sat down, and said, "Deal me in." And that was his way of saying, fellas, you belong here. It's gonna get better, and I'm glad to have you on my team. When asked about his friend's passing, the great Hank Aaron, baseball's legitimate all-time home run king, and someone who faced much hateful racism himself, said this of Stan, and I quote, "I not only liked Stan Musial, I wanted to be like Stan Musial." 2 years ago, I was privileged to accompany Stan and his family to the White House as President Obama awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And the president said this about Stan, quote, "His brilliance could come in blinding bursts, hitting 5 home runs in a single doubleheader, leading the league in singles, doubles, triples, and RBIs over a single season. Stan Musial made that brilliance burn for 2 decades. even as he missed a season in his prime to serve his country in the U.S. Navy during World War II. Stan remains to this day an icon, untarnished, a beloved pillar of the community, a gentleman you'd want your kids to emulate. Mr. Speaker, that is absolutely true, and soon when millions of Americans cross the beautiful new bridge that will bear his name. Mr. Speaker, I ask for one addition.
Give a minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. And when millions of Americans cross that new bridge that will bear his name, I hope they will remember that Stan Musial was more than just a proud veteran and a great ball player. His life and legacy truly symbolize the best of the greatest generation. I thank my colleagues from Missouri and Illinois for supporting this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I'd like to thank my colleague, Mr. Luetkemeyer, and my colleague, Mr. Clay. And thank you for your service. Thank you for the stories about Stan Musial being the man when it came to a difficult time in Major League history. And I'd also like to